Hello, everybody. Welcome to TSS2021. I hope you're enjoying the session so far. We had a gala opening yesterday and some prominent speakers giving us a lot of insights, and this morning was wonderful. Today, we are going to kick off this session the topic today is post-COVID startup opportunities. And I would like to introduce the moderator today, Mr. Kiran. And just basically to give you a brief on Kiran, Kiran is a charter member at TAI Hyderabad, and also he's an independent business advisor, angel investor, startup mentor, and with a very deep background in scaling up operations. And he's worked in multiple continents and countries, and he's an alumnus of Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and did his engineering from Osmania University. He's worked as an advisor, or presently he's working as an advisor for Dallas Venture Capital, leading cross-border venture capital firm, invested in emerging B2B technology startups in India and the US, CSS Corporation, a mid-sized IT services firm, among others. So I would like to hand over the mic to Kiran and Mr. Simon, who is along with him. Kiran, all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balaji, for the great introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are watching this session live from whichever part of the world you have joined. Today, we explore a region which is fast emerging on the startup landscape and getting a lot of attention. Middle East and North Africa, more known as MENA. A region which has always been a rich source of energy, oil and gas, and of course, it has got a great and rich civilizational history, and not to mention and not to forget its gastronomic delights. Whoever have passed through this region would never forget its food. Of course, though the startups in US, India, China, or Singapore, some of these countries hog the headlines in the startup news world, thousands of startups are being set up in this region, particularly with UAE, Saudi, and Egypt accounting for more than 2/3 of these startups. And of course, the big VCs can't be left behind. We already have the Sequoias, the SoftBanks, and the Tiger Globals of the world who have already started investing in this region. Some studies say that the startups and the SME sector contribute to 40% of the GDP and 50% of the employment in the region. Now, I would have our distinguished guest validate that in some time, but we definitely know that there are a few unicorns which have emerged from this region, and there are unicorns which are dotting the region's landscape. The growth has been particularly accelerated by the digitization imperative caused by the pandemic. The last few years, some interesting startups got acquired at significant valuations. A unicorn was listed in NYSE, and the first half of this year itself has seen close to about $1.5 billion of startup funding in this particular region, compared to $1 billion of funding the entire last year. And to understand how the startup scene has evolved over the past few years in MENA, and what are the changes brought in by the pandemic and the emerging opportunities post-COVID, we have a very eminent and distinguished speaker, Dr. Simon Galpin, who is with us to discuss the emerging opportunities emerging in this region, particularly in the background of the pandemic. For this topic, we could not have asked for a better speaker. He is somebody who has personally seen the startup ecosystem evolve in the region and has played a significant role in its evolution. Currently a venture partner with PlusVC, a new venture capital fund based in Abu Dhabi, focusing on early stage startups. Islands are where his home has always been. He was born in Malta. He grew up in UK, studied Chinese in Taiwan, lived and worked in Hong Kong for over 20 years, and is now based in Bahrain. Over a long checkered career, he has held many important responsibilities. He was the head of Asia Pacific for Scottish Enterprise, where he established and managed offices throughout Asia before leading Invest Hong Kong as its Director General, attracting record levels of FDI. And he also launched Start Me Up HK. Driven by his passion to help startups grow, he moved his base from Hong Kong to Bahrain when he was invited by the Crown Prince to join the Economic Development Board as the Managing Director, where Simon enabled the transformation to a world-class intellectual process automation ecosystem, IP ecosystem, and launched Startup Bahrain. Apart from his role with PlusVC, Simon also wears many hats, including as a senior advisor, OCO Global, a Belfast-headquartered consulting firm advising and supporting governments on investment and trade promotion. He's supporting corporates on market entry strategies. He's an advisor to BambooCon, a new tokenized equity crowdfunding platform based in Dubai and Bahrain. He is also an advisor and professor at Applied Science University in Bahrain, leading on support for global alliances and development of entrepreneurship. Welcome, Simon, to the discussion on the emerging opportunities post-COVID in the MENA region. Happy to have you here.
Kiran, thank you very much for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you, joining you from the Kingdom of Bahrain. I'm a big fan of Thai, and it's great to be part of the TSS this year. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Simon. And that starts me off with a question. Living in a place for 20 years is almost like it's his home, right? What made you move from Hong Kong to Bahrain? And how have you seen the startup ecosystem develop over the last 5 years in this region?
Well, it's a good question. It wasn't an easy decision. When I was first approached, I was happy to sort of lend a hand remotely from Hong Kong. And I was very happy. We've just launched Invest HK. There was a lot going on in Hong Kong at that time. But they insisted that I come and visit them in Bahrain. Mm-hmm. And, seeing is believing. Once I'd actually visited the island kingdom, met with some of my future colleagues, got a grip and an understanding about the opportunities here right across the GCC region, it was a no-brainer. I was very happy to make that move. What's always a challenge and what's always interesting is being involved in something from the start. And by joining the EDB, I was really able to work with a number of different partners to create StartUp Bahrain and really kickstart what was happening in the ecosystem here.
Wonderful. Yeah, building and molding something is always a great joy. So how have you seen the ecosystem develop over the last 5 years, and what are the key demographic and geographical advantages of this region, which is attracting so many startups and the funding?
Well, the region shares, many of the advantages that India has in terms of having a young population, a population of early adopters, a very tech-savvy population. But it's probably about 5 years behind India in terms of the development of the ecosystem. And I'm not just talking about Bahrain, I'm really talking about the whole of the GCC here. And that's interesting for me because when you get into an ecosystem at an early stage, you really have an opportunity to make an impact and to shape that ecosystem. And although it's a long way behind some of the more developed startup landscapes, we are really poised to start a very rapid growth trajectory here. And that steep curve that we're going to start going up here in the region has actually been accelerated in many respects by the COVID outbreak.
Yeah, we can already see that. But before we go into the larger region, also would like to know a little bit about PlusVC and what is your investment thesis? What type of startups do you invest in, Simon?
Well, PlusVC is a relatively new venture capital firm, but the team is a very experienced team. When they worked with 500 startups, they really led the way in terms of early stage investing right across the MENA region and have been probably the most active investing team in MENA for the last 5 years. And now with PlusVC, we're continuing that investment thesis. So we're focusing early stage seed, Series A. We're completely sector agnostic. So we're not trying to predict what are going to be the very important sectors in this region just yet. Very focused on the quality of the team, the dynamics of the founders and so on when we're choosing investors. And although we focus on obviously scalable businesses with a digital or tech element to them, we're not restricted in any way by geography or by sector.
Okay. Great. So do you see a lot of new venture capital funds coming up in this region? And what's the sort of corpus size that they are getting in? Can you throw some light on that?
Well, as I say, things are really starting to pick up here. There's a lot of interest in many of the economies. Some funds are looking at particular geographies, particular countries. We're seeing a lot of activity in Saudi Arabia. As you can imagine, the whole economy, that the startup landscape there is changing very rapidly. That's creating a lot of buzz, a lot of interest. There's a lot of money flowing into startups in Saudi as well. And of course, UAE is already very established as a hub for technology startups. For us at PlusVC, we see a lot of opportunities in some of the other economies. The economy which is the largest source of deal flow for us is actually Egypt. There's a lot of very hungry entrepreneurs and founders in Egypt that are coming up with some really good startup concepts. But we're also looking at the Middle East and North Africa in its whole. And I think there's a lot of opportunities emerging in the North Africa area as well. So, you know, we're a small firm, but we've spread right across the region with, you know, partners in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and we're looking to expand into some of those other geographies as well going forward.
Wonderful. And you covered most of the main markets in terms of the startup flow. You talked about UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, which I understand contributes to close to 75% of the entire startup ecosystem in this region. So while Simon, you said that as at PlusVC, you are not trying to predict the sectors, but do you see in the region some sectoral themes emerging? And also a question is, are they trying to build for the local markets because there's so much of diversity within that region itself? Or are the startups looking at trying to build for the world?
You know, it's changing very fast, so it's difficult to predict what are going to be the important sectors in 3, 4, 5 years' time. Right now, though, many aspects of fintech are very, very hot. We're seeing a lot happening in payments and various other fintech products. Cryptocurrency exchanges are doing quite well in the region. So that's quite an active space in Bahrain in particular. Software as a service products are doing very well across the region. E-commerce is a growth sector really everywhere, primarily because of COVID. You know, we're seeing people saw e-commerce growing very, very steadily, but we've actually leapfrogged probably 3 years as a result of people shopping online during lockdowns. And then we're seeing health tech emerge as an important priority for governments right across the region. And so what we're seeing are many of the governments in the GCC region really getting behind supporting startups and founders. In Bahrain, we have the Al Waha Fund of Funds, which is investing in VCs that will invest right across the region, not only in Bahrain. We also have the Hope Fund, which is a government fund primarily aimed at supporting seed stage entrepreneurs that are getting into the startup space in Bahrain too. But right across the region, you're seeing new initiatives coming in, particularly in Saudi Arabia, where there's a lot of activity with new accelerators, new incubators, and government funding going in to support the sector.
So do you also see a lot of the international biggies? We already have seen SoftBank, Sequoia, and Toyota Global enter. Do you see more of them coming in and setting up shop in the region?
We do. At the moment, the space is primarily led by local players, local VCs, and local investors. But we are already starting to see some of the bigger Silicon Valley firms coming into the region, particularly in Saudi Arabia, as you say. And the SoftBank Vision Fund, I mean, that's a major private equity investor, but they are not focusing so much on the early stage. At the moment, the big opportunities, I would say, for VCs are in, you know, Series A, potentially Series B, but not so much in the big private equity space just yet.
And you said that some of the startups are changing. So do you see them scaling and going the Yella way, or do you see them going the Karim and South way, where they go to a certain stage and get acquired by the large global players?
Well, a bit of both, really. It depends on the product, depends on the market that they're addressing. There is a lot of scope, really. I mean, this is still quite a sizable market if you take the whole of the MENA region. It's a population bigger than the United States. So, we're interested in supporting, obviously, startups that have a product, application, service that will be meaningful for this particular region and that is scalable initially within the region. But beyond that, there could be global opportunities as well. Where I think there is scope for more cooperation is between the MENA region and India. I think there is scope for Indian scale-ups to consider the MENA as their next big market as soon as they want to go global, a great stepping stone for other markets. But also, I think there's scope for investors in the MENA region to be actively involved in supporting some of those scale-ups to come into MENA too.
Wonderful. That gets me to the next question. While I can definitely see a market for the Indian startups to explore the MENA region and collaborate and cooperate, do you see also a role for the Indian venture capital funds to participate and play a role in the growth story in MENA?
Absolutely. I mean, there are some really experienced Indian VCs that are very experienced in supporting Indian startups, of course, and understanding the growth models that particularly Indian startups have followed. Much of that would translate also to MENA. So I think that Indian VCs are very well placed now to expand into the MENA region. And of course, we would love to partner with them and share deal flow going forward.
Oh, definitely. I think there is a scope. Definitely what I hear from you is we can collaborate and also bring some of the learnings in helping some of these startups scale and grow globally. So,
absolutely.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the initiatives taken by various governments to promote the startups? You briefly talked about Bahrain and the fund of funds. There are also a lot of regulatory restrictions, particularly in terms of data flow, and it's considered a little close. Can you talk a little bit about how things are easing out and how the governments are supporting the startups?
Well, one of the things that excites me about the GCC is that there is tremendous scope for regulatory reform. Laws are being changed, regulations are being lifted. The whole region is opening up much more to direct foreign investment. Here in Bahrain, we've chosen not to have special economic zones, and most of the economy now is open to 100% foreign investors. So an Indian entrepreneur, an Indian scale-up can come into Bahrain. They don't need a local partner anymore. They can invest directly in a business. Only a few sectors are still restricted where you need to have a local partner. That is not just unique to Bahrain. We're seeing this right across the region. Probably the biggest change is in Saudi Arabia, where so many laws, so many restrictions are being lifted, and it's really opening up the whole economy now to foreign direct investment. And this is necessary. Many of the economies have realized that they need to diversify away from oil and gas. Getting behind a thriving startup ecosystem is a great way to really action that diversification and make sure that your own young population are engaged, creating job opportunities and benefiting from some of this liberalization.
And you touched upon a very interesting subject. We have seen Saudi Arabia particularly and the entire region open up to more inclusive growth and empowering women. And do you see many women-led startups coming up? You mentioned in one of your this thing that about 24% of your startups have at least a woman co-founder. So would like to know how that is developing, particularly in terms of women playing a greater role in building startups.
Well, at PlusVC, we're very interested in supporting entrepreneurs that subscribe to the SDGs. And of course, female empowerment is a very important component of that. So we're really interested in tapping into a tremendous network, a tremendous resource of female entrepreneurs and founders. Particularly in Bahrain, you see women entrepreneurs are very active in this space, a very well-educated population, and a very active and entrepreneurial population. But it's not just here. We're seeing this increasingly in Saudi Arabia, increasingly in the UAE as well. And one of the things that's interesting is what you're getting in places like Bahrain and UAE is a really interesting cross-fertilization, if you like, between homegrown local founders and founders coming in from elsewhere, joining together in new business ventures and bringing both that global perspective and that local knowledge in growing some of those new businesses.
That's interesting. So that also opens up opportunities for many experienced Indian entrepreneurs to partner with some of the brighter entrepreneurs over there. That's very interesting. Okay.
In fact, one of the things that kind of surprises me as an outsider is that there is much more female engagement in the startup ecosystem here in the GCC than we even saw in Hong Kong, which already had quite an established base of female entrepreneurs.
And that's really glad to know that. And I'm sure over the next couple of years, we would see more of that. And that again, let me switch tracks a bit and understand as to what sort of role are these startups playing in the sustainability sector. Middle East traditionally has been known for oil and petroleum products, and the world slowly but surely is shifting towards renewable and sustainable energy. The pace has increased. So can you speak of any startups which are focusing on sustainable energy products in MENA and any other sustainable initiatives and how they are growing?
Well, there's a lot of talk about waste management, recycling and the circular economy. In Egypt, there are some great startups that are in that space now. So much waste goes into landfill that could actually be recycled, that could be used for energy generation, that can be brought back into the economy and reducing the amount of volume that goes into landfill. That's one thing. And of course, solar is there's tremendous potential in this region, untapped potential to make much better use of solar. We're starting to see that here. We're seeing that much more aggressively in places like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But startups that are in that space, I think there is absolutely the sky's the limit for them to come in and offer solutions in this part of the world. The other area that we're just beginning to touch on is actually in space technology and space economics. There are a number of national space agencies that have been set up in Bahrain, UAE, and Saudi. And now what we want to see is much more of a bottom-up approach, which we are already seeing in the US, where even relatively small-scale startups are starting to get into the whole space logistics sector. And I think India is also a great location for that type of startup initiative as well.
Oh yeah, recently we have seen a group of space technology companies together form a consortium. Startups form a consortium at IIT Madras, IIT Chennai. And yeah, there's a very interesting area for collaboration. Do you see it being open to foreign companies and foreign startups also?
Absolutely. If we're going to grow this sector quickly, it's really important that we are open to entrepreneurs, startups, and scale-ups from around the world. Increasingly for economies to be successful, particularly small economies like Bahrain, you have to compete to attract global talent. It's not enough to rely only on your local talent pool. And of course, when we promote some of these much smaller economies in the GCC, it's a very different offer to what you would promote in India. We don't have, an economy of over 1.4 billion people. Here in Bahrain, it's all about access. It's only interesting for a startup to go into a new market if they can actually access consumers, access potential investors and customers. And in a small economy like Bahrain, that's kind of an edge where you have only 1 or 2 degrees of separation. Everybody knows everybody else. You can quickly find the right partners, the right customers.
That seems to be that seems to be the story in the entire region, right, Simon? It's Bahrain probably is an example, but whether you want to open up something in Saudi or Egypt, it really helps to know people, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So but are there any other initiatives in terms of water conservation or conservation or agricultural produce in this particular region? Particularly, Egypt is very fertile with Nile flowing through. So do you see any startups coming in those areas?
Well, another priority that has emerged as a result of COVID and issues with supply chains is food security. And in Bahrain, but also in other economies, the governments are putting a lot more money into ensuring that we have a greater percentage of our food supply chain grown locally. This can be vertical farming. Of course, there's a lot that we can learn from other economies in this region. And dare I say it, Israel is a leader in this in terms of, making the desert green, helping to use hydroponics and other types of irrigation to really get the most out of what is a fairly dry climate.
Yeah, I guess there's definitely work happening, not just in Israel. Israel, of course, is definitely a leader, but even Singapore and some of the other landlocked, constrained countries are really working on some of these initiatives to get more out of less. I'm sure there is a lot of scope for learning, and Israel, of course, is there very close. Great. So we are almost coming to the end of our discussion, Simon. And one question I had is, COVID has preponed the entire digital transformation across the globe. And you also talked about acceleration post-COVID. Has it opened up any new opportunities, any new sectors? And how do you see the startups collaborating with India on the digitization effort?
Well, the real priority for many of the governments here is digitalization. We're putting in place the physical infrastructure, the data centers, the cable connectivity to make sure that we can compete in a digital landscape. But then there's also the soft infrastructure. So changing the data protection laws, creating laws that will allow people to store data and manage that data using their home country's legal system in a sort of embassy type concept for data is something that we're pioneering here in Bahrain. So there's a lot happening at a sort of government and regulatory level. But what we're also seeing as people have been working from home, they're also having more time to generate maybe an idea that they had in the back of their mind and actually begin and action some of these new startup ventures. And so we've seen a rapid increase, both in terms of the number of startups and the number of applications we're getting to our fund just in the last 18 months. So the startup ecosystem is one of the areas where COVID has actually been kind of a blessing in disguise.
And and hoping that this would continue and this acceleration and that speed would only continue to increase the number of startups and also the funding coming in and explore the whole ecosystem over there, which will definitely be good not only for the region but for entire Asia. And thank you, Simon, for sharing such wonderful insights about the startup ecosystem in MENA and throwing a lot of light on the emerging opportunities in the region. I'm sure many of the audience here would be even more interested in joining the growth story and joining the party. Definitely, we would like to partner Thai India, and the Thai networks across the Middle East would definitely like to partner in helping and enabling this growth story. Thank you. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much, Kiran. It's my pleasure.
Thanks. Over to you, Balaji.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Kiran. Thank you, Simon. You set the tone very nicely for the evening here. It's wonderful to hear about what's happening in that region. There's a lot of potential. We hear a lot of things about Dubai and Saudi Arabia, but now the Thai people and the entrepreneurs will look forward to visiting there, not for just go sightseeing, but actually think about some business opportunities. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure having you, and thank you once more.